Hey, what is going on, guys? In this video today, we're going to be discussing the Fortnite World Cup, and more specifically, some of the issues with how the event has unfolded so far. As I'm sure most of you guys are aware by now, the 10-week-long Fortnite World Cup qualifiers officially came to an end on Friday, June 21st. For an online-only qualifier of this magnitude with tens of thousands of people competing each week across a bunch of different regions all across the world, this was a very ambitious undertaking by Fortnite's competitive staff. So I want to make it clear that even though it definitely didn't go perfectly, and we're going to be discussing some of those problems in this video, Epic Games did a pretty good job as a whole. I'm going to try to stay away from some of the obvious stuff like the whole XXiF cheating and then qualifying ordeal, because that's probably been covered a million different times already. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Alright, so I want to start this video off by specifically talking about the World Cup and World Cup qualifiers in regards to controller Fortnite players. I actually remember recording a video about a year ago when, for the first time ever, the Fortnite competitive staff officially announced that all platforms of Fortnite were going to compete against each other in future competitive events. I also remember specifically talking about how much of a disadvantage that was going to put console and controller players at, and I even went as far as saying that very few, if any, controller/console players would actually qualify for the World Cup. Now, to be fair, this was before things like custom controller binds, custom building sensitivity, and custom editing sensitivity, so controller players have been helped out a bit since I made that video. However, what I said definitely wasn't all that far off. Out of the 200 total qualifying spots for the Fortnite World Cup, 100 in solos and 100 in duos, 8 of those spots were claimed by players that play Fortnite on a controller, with all 8 of those players being controller on PC. So 0 console players qualified, even though we were pretty much expecting that. And in case you were wondering, of those 8 controller players, 6 qualified in solos, and those players are Unknown X Army, Atlantis Lecce, Ghost Issa, Astonish, Irus, and Tuzi. Sorry if I pronounced any of those names wrong. And the controller players that qualified in duos were Aiden and Wolfies, although they weren't on the same team and they both had a non-controller teammate. So controller players only accounting for 4% of the total World Cup qualifying spots is something that I know a lot of other regular console/controller Fortnite players are disappointed about. And I think that disappointed is actually the perfect word to describe those feelings. With the exception of XXiF and Ronaldo, nobody's really angry that mouse and keyboard players took 96% of the qualifying spots, because they absolutely earned them fair and square. And the funny thing is, controller players actually got a bit of a lucky break about halfway through the 10 weeks of qualifiers. In the first 4 weeks of World Cup qualifiers, only 1 controller player had qualified, and that was Unknown X Army in solos week 3. But then, after week 4 of qualifiers, Fortnite Season 8 ended and Fortnite Season 9 began. This change of seasons resulted in the pump shotgun being removed from the game, and weapons like the combat shotgun and drum gun being added into the game. Those changes meant that the close-range meta went from being dominated by the pump shotgun, which is a weapon that vastly favors mouse players, to a more spray-dominant meta, which more so favors controller players. So as bad as 8 out of 200 may seem, if the amount of controller players qualifying stayed at the same pace as it was through the first 4 weeks, that number would have likely been much closer to maybe 2 or 3 players. But even with that being true, I know there are a lot of controller Fortnite players out there that like to watch other controller Fortnite players. Obviously, they'll still watch the popular mouse and keyboard players and be entertained while doing so. But as a controller player myself, I can totally understand why a lot of other people prefer to watch players who play on the same input device as they do. I mean, guys like Nick Merckx and Aiden have built huge audiences largely based on the idea of their viewers being a part of what they call the controller gang. I've actually seen a lot of different ideas being floated around online about how Fortnite should have handled controller players in the World Cup and also in future events. The fact of the matter is, no matter what they decided to do would have caused controversy, but one idea I particularly liked was separating mouse and keyboard players and controller players, and then having something like 180 out of 200 qualifying spots guaranteed for mouse and keyboard players, and then 20 out of 200 qualifying spots guaranteed for controller players. That may sound weird, but if you think about it, that's basically exactly how Epic handled the different regions during qualifiers, with each regional server getting a different number of predetermined qualifying spots. Mouse and keyboard players don't like playing against controller players, and vice versa as well, so keeping them separate during qualifiers would also be an added bonus. The final thing that's worth mentioning here is that Epic actually recently commented on the idea of separating console/controller players for some future tournaments. In a post on the competitive Fortnite subreddit, a user asked, "Is there any plan on making a separate arena or competitive mode for only console players? Some of the more casual players would like the experience of playing at a competitive level against players with the same hardware." To which a member of the Fortnite competitive team replied saying, "We'll be running a few console/mobile specific tournaments in the future, but the majority of tournaments and arena will continue to be mixed." So I'm definitely excited to see how that ends up playing out. The next issue that I want to point out about World Cup qualifiers is something that I'm really surprised hasn't created a bigger uproar in the community, because it played such a huge role in the Week 10 NA East qualifiers. So on NA East, each time it's a duos week, the top 3 teams qualify. However, in Week 10, Saf and Zayt finished 3rd, but since they'd already qualified in a previous week, that means that the team that finished in 4th place would get that last qualifying spot. What made this especially interesting for Week 10 is that the teams in 4th and 5th place had the exact same amount of points, 89 to be exact. What this meant is that the final duos World Cup qualifying spot would actually be determined by a tiebreaker, which for these qualifiers is the total amount of victory royales. Let me show you why that's such a mistake and how it cost the team that was probably more deserving a spot in the World Cup. So as you can see on your screen, in 4th place we had the duo of Young Calculator and Macwood. They played 10 games, got 4 wins, averaged 4.1 elims, had a 19.7 average placement, and averaged 8.9 points per game. Now, take a look at the team that didn't qualify, Beggs and E11 Hart. They only played 8 games, got 3 wins, averaged 4.4 elims, had a 6.4 average placement, and averaged 11.1 points per game. On a per-game basis, Hart and Beggs played considerably better than Calculator and Macwood did. They averaged slightly more eliminations, way better placement, and over 2 more points per game. At the end of the day, they got the exact same amount of points as Calculator and Macwood in 2 less total games. I have no problem with victory royales being a secondary tiebreaker, but the primary tiebreaker should have absolutely been points per game. Here's a simple sports comparison that should make it clear as day why that's the best option. If one player hits 50 home runs in 250 at-bats, and another player hits 50 home runs in 500 at-bats, who would you consider the better home run hitter? You wouldn't use some crazy tiebreaker like average distance that each home run traveled. No, they hit the same amount of home runs, but the first player did it in considerably less at-bats, so he's obviously the better home run hitter. I actually checked the 11 Hearts Twitter, and I didn't see him complain at all about this, which I find crazy, because if I were him, I'd honestly be feeling kinda cheated. And speaking of feeling cheated, the final issue I want to quickly bring up are the inconsistent queue times that had a major impact on these World Cup qualifiers. I'll throw a few tweets on the screen right now from just week 10 of guys that were really close to qualifying, not getting to play a final game because of longer than normal queue times. I understand with the lobbies needing to be filled with players with a similar amount of points, the whole queuing system is probably very complicated, so I don't even want to blame Epic too much for this one. But it's just crazy to think about how different things could have been if some of these players that were only a few points off got to play their final game instead of getting a 6+ minute queue. So, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you watched the entire thing, be sure to let me know with a comment down the comment section below. I want to know, if you're a controller Fortnite player, are you upset or disappointed at all by the lack of controller players that qualified, or do you not really care? Be sure to leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe, turn on post notifications, do whatever the heck you want, and I will catch you guys next time.